Principles of American Politics, Introduction to the Course, Lecture 2. Hello again, this is Jonathan Culp of the Politics Department. So I have already posted one introductory lecture on Brightspace that takes you through how to navigate the course and find everything you need in Brightspace. And I also went over the syllabus, so you can see the course schedule, when the quizzes are, and the exams and other course requirements. So that was all kind of nuts and bolts stuff. In this second introductory lecture, I want to talk about the substance of the course, actually talk a little bit about why you are taking this class, because I've been teaching this class for a number of years, and of course I know that most of you who are taking this class are not doing so voluntarily. You're doing it because it's part of the core curriculum, and UD wouldn't let you graduate unless you took it. So you're kind of a captive audience, but I feel that it is my responsibility as the professor to explain to you why Principles of American Politics is part of the core at UD, and so why it's worth your while to take the course, why, in effect, it's good that you've been forced to take the course. So why is politics part of the core? And why focus on American politics? I mean, you might say that there's something kind of a little bit out of place with having politics in the core. You've got Homer and Dante and Dostoevsky and Plato and Aristotle and Descartes and all of these greats, these great works of art and literature. And then you've got, Chuck Schumer and Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden and what have you. Why there's something strange, maybe you might think, about having politics in a core, that it's something that kind of lower than really being worthy of concern. So I want to say something about that, and I want to start at the beginning with the mission statement of the University of Dallas. As some of you might know, the university does have a formal mission statement where it articulates the particular vision of education and the purpose of education that we at the university seek to pursue and to embody. And that mission statement begins as follows. It says, the University of Dallas is dedicated to the pursuit of wisdom, of truth, and of virtue as the proper and primary ends of education. The university seeks to educate its students so that they may develop the intellectual and moral virtues, prepare themselves for life and work in a problematic and changing world, and become leaders able to act responsibly for their own good and for the good of their family, community, country, and church. End of quotation. Now, there's quite a bit more to it, and you can find it online if you want to read the rest of the mission. But that's really enough for us, and if you wanted to summarize this, the idea would be that the University of Dallas sees the proper purpose of education as the cultivation of truth, knowledge of the truth, and cultivation of intellectual and moral virtue, meaning to make students both have better character, moral virtue, and also make them able to think better, intellectual virtue, all for the sake of living a good life, right? It's not conceived of solely as professional training or technical training, but a broader formation, really a formation of your soul to enable you to live well, to pursue happiness for yourself, and to be a good member of your community, to contribute to the common good, to the good of your neighbors, and the good of those around you, and maybe even to be a leader. So how does the study of politics fit in with this mission of promoting truth and virtue for the sake of living well? And, just to be a little bit blunt about it, we need politics. That's the place to start. Politics is an enduring part of the human condition. All lasting human communities rely upon some form of authority to hold them together. I mean, there are very few forms of a lasting form of community that doesn't have somebody or some group that's in charge. And really, you could say advanced civilizations or broader cultures usually rely on some form of government to secure and to preserve the basic order of society, right? The order within which we live as individuals, families, neighborhoods, communities such as the University of Dallas, right? Most of our life is spent to a certain extent under an umbrella created by the government. And this is something that I think is quite obvious to us right now during the COVID-19 pandemic, because we are all living the way we are living because of decisions made by the government in response to this disease, right? With the lockdowns, the quarantines, the social distancing, the fact that UD had to move to online classes midway through the semester. Some of those decisions might have been made that way anyways, but a lot of the particular decisions that people have been in response to commands given by government, ostensibly for the common good. So, the response to COVID-19 is an example of government inaction. But it's not just in big dramatic moments like that the government's doing that. This stuff is happening all the time. All the rules and regulations and decisions, and the laws of the governing authorities, the activities of the governing authorities, they're all around you, structuring the world that you live in, whether you notice it or not, right? The government sets the rules we have to follow through various public policy. It directs the actions of society in particular directions. It taxes, it spends, it does all sorts of things that affect our lives, both as individuals and as members of communities, right? I mean, there are also all sorts of rules made by the government that affect the way that the University of Dallas operates, for example. So politics is really all around us, sometimes more visibly than others, but always there. And so if upon reaching adulthood, right, and the purpose of college is not for you to stay at college, there are only a few weirdos like me that basically stay, we just move to the other side of the podium and stay in college. But for the most part, the goal is to get you guys through college, give you valuable knowledge, valuable skills, and then set you loose in the world to live your lives. And so if upon adulthood, you want to live a prosperous, responsible life of service, or maybe even of leadership, right? You have to have some kind of understanding of the order that you live in. Otherwise, you're flying blind. Right? And as a citizen, you will be at times called to take stands on things, whether it's vote, usually in the form of voting. There's also jury duty and things like that. But you as a citizen have a right. You have civil rights that entitle you to participate in the political life of the community, right? To contribute to the good of the community in various ways, right? And so as a citizen, you have a right, and to a certain extent, you have a duty to contribute in some way to the good of the community that you live within and whose proper operation you kind of presuppose to go about living your life, right? You don't build the roads that you drive on. You don't build the libraries that you rely upon. You don't build the public infrastructure that you rely upon, the schools that you send your kids to. And there are all sorts of public goods out there that we rely upon to live our lives. And as citizens, we have a duty in some way to contribute to the good of that community in return. But so to act responsibly as a citizen in your life requires knowledge, and it requires some judgment in the political sphere, right? Some kind of knowledge of that order that shapes the community that we live in. And that's where this course comes in, to kind of help you develop really civic knowledge, right? The goal of this course is not to try to turn you into a political scientist, into some kind of academic student of politics. It's to inform your thinking as a citizen, to help you see more clearly and judge correctly the issues of important public concern that you're going to come across in your life. So this course is a course on American politics, but it is also more generally a course in political philosophy. That's one of the reasons some of you might have had this experience that if you transfer to UD, or if you have prior credit elsewhere, when you come to UD, you're not allowed to place out of Principles of American Politics. Even if you've taken an Introduction to American Government course at another college, that will only transfer as an elective. It will not transfer as a substitute for taking this course. And the reason why is because we teach this course very differently from what most Introduction to American Politics courses are, precisely because we take a philosophic perspective on politics. And so that's why, before I get into American politics, I want to say something about the character of political philosophy. So now, political philosophy is obviously the philosophical study of politics, and politics is a human activity that has existed for millennia, right? Politics is one of the things we human beings do. When you think about politics, when you think about political activity, political activity in the most abstract sense, political activity is basically aimed at one or two things. It's aimed either at preservation or change, right? Politics is either about preserving some good thing that the community has, protect it, keep it from growing worse, to preserve our freedom, to preserve our national security, or what have you. So some political activity is aimed at preserving good things to keep them from being harmed or becoming worse. And some political activity is aimed at change, in the sense of changing things for the better, taking a situation that is either bad or not as good as it could be and trying to make it better. Right. And in a certain way, this orientation towards preservation and change kind of underlies the idea of being a conservative or a liberal, or a progressive, right? I mean, and those conservative and progressive kind of capture this idea that, kind of the primary conservative stance is trying to preserve the good things to keep them from being degraded. And kind of the standard progressive stance is to try to make progress towards a better future. Right? So political activity is aimed at either preservation or change. But in either case, it's guided by considerations of better and worse, or more broadly by considerations of the good, or by considerations of the common good, right? The judgments that we make about that which needs to be preserved or that which should be changed for the better are all at least implicitly guided by some kind of understanding of the good of the community. How can we preserve or attain the good for our community? But then another fact about the human condition is that when we form these opinions about the common good, about what would be good for the country, what's in the national interest, and what it requires of us, when we make these judgments about the common good, for the most part, we're guided by opinions. We're not guided by knowledge, right? And usually, people will not claim to have full knowledge in these areas, but we have opinions about how things should be. And this is but people have different opinions. And so that's one of the reasons why, at least anywhere where you have some degree of political freedom, politics is an area of sometimes intense controversy, because people's opinions about what the common good is and what serves it differ from one another. Right? So politics is a realm of clashing ideas, clashing opinions. Everybody, at least ostensibly, aimed at the common good, but differing very much in how they assess the common good. And so originally, like when you go back to Plato and Aristotle and sort of the beginnings of political philosophy, the role of political philosophy was really something kind of like the role of an umpire. The political philosopher, the idea here was to replace our opinions about the common good with genuine knowledge, right? In the same way that natural philosophy is the attempt to replace our opinions about nature with knowledge about nature. And generally speaking, the philosophy is an attempt to start with the opinions that we have and replace them with genuine knowledge through investigation of some kind or another. So the role of political philosophy was to replace opinions about the good, the common good, or the good society, with genuine knowledge of those things. And in particular, going back to ancient political philosophy, one of the preeminent investigation that political philosophers would make had to do with the question of what we might call constitutions or regimes. This idea of what is the best way to organize society. So not just looking at this law or that law and thinking about whether it's good, but more fundamental questions, things like who should be in charge? How should we choose who should be in charge? What are the qualities that we want of our political leaders? What institutions do we need? Who should make the laws? Who should enforce the laws? How should we adjudicate the laws? What should the laws aim at? These kind of fundamental questions. Who rules and to what end? How should power be divided or distributed? Who should hold that power? These are all very controversial questions, but these are the fundamental questions of politics. How should we order our society? What's better? Monarchy? Aristocracy? Democracy of some kind? right? There are many different ways of organizing the government of a society. What way's best, and how do we know? That's really kind of the fundamental question of political philosophy. So Plato's Republic, for example, involves the building of a best regime, or kind of an ideal city, and you see things like that over and over again. But again, in thinking about how best to organize government, you're still being guided by some kind of consideration of the common good, right? Some kind of idea of, well, what needs to be present in a truly good society? And then how do we organize government so that we can attain that? But this idea of the common good in society, it presupposes some kind of understanding of the human good, right? You can't know what's good for a community of human beings unless you know something about what human beings are and what's good for them. And so that means to think clearly about politics, you really have to have some knowledge of human nature. What is a human being? Like, what are the most important facts that we need to know about ourselves? What makes us tick? What are we after? What's good for us? What's bad for us? What duties do we have, if any? What rights should we have, if any? And all these, these kind of all flow back to this question of human nature. What are we? And politics always, at least implicitly, involves some kind of answer to that question. What are we? What's our place in the world? And so, in other words, a real informed understanding of the common good presupposes a kind of broader reflection on human nature, the world that we live in, our place in that world, and really also even theological reflection on God. Yeah, it can be very politically consequential whether you believe God exists or not, and what kind of God you believe in, right? Because if there is a God, then we are subject to that God. And if we're subject to that God, then there might actually be goods and conceptions of right and wrong that aren't up for debate, that we're simply subject to as creatures of God. Whereas if there is no God, if we're not creatures of God, then there might not be any higher law or higher morality that is supposed to guide us, right? These are open questions, but this is just a way of saying that real, thorough reflection on the common good and how to organize society presupposes anthropology, you might say, reflection on human nature, theology, reflection on God, if there is a God, and also something like natural philosophy, reflection on the world, man, the world, and God. And that's what the core is about, right? If you think about the core curriculum at UD, it is a series of kind of introductions to important aspects of various disciplines that all have some kind of bearing or another on human nature, on the world in which we inhabit, and on God. So the core is there to kind of give you a tour of some of the most important arguments and principles informing this broad reflection on human nature and our place within the larger whole. And so politics kind of fits within that. It's one of the proper subjects. Now, politics is somewhat like, you could say, history, in that the particular subject matter of politics is human beings, right? Not so much the natural world, although that can enter in. Not so much God, although again, those questions can enter in. But the fundamental focus of political philosophy is it's a study of human beings. And it's not only simply a study of human beings, but it particularly kind of like sociology or economics. Politics is the study of human beings in their social aspect, in their relations with their fellow human beings. And the particular character of politics is that politics is a study of human beings, I would say, in the activity of ruling and being ruled, right? That's the kind of fundamental difference. That's what marks out, I would say, the political sphere in particular, is that politics is the area where there is ruling and there is obedience. Now, you can't have a democracy where, people both rule and obey at the same time. As citizens are subject to the law, but they also have an effect on making the law. But in general, politics is the activity of human beings ordering communities, ruling and being ruled, right? And ordering communities towards the common good, usually through the makings of institutions. So that's where politics fits in particularly. The study of human beings in the relations of ruling and being ruled and ordered towards the common good of their community. That's politics. And so a clear understanding of that requires not just some historical knowledge, but a broader knowledge of the human condition and the world that we find ourselves in. So that's political philosophy. But then you might say, okay, that sounds interesting. I hope you're thinking it sounds interesting. But you still might say, that's fine, but why are we studying American politics? I mean, if we're going to have a philosophic approach to politics in the UD core, why not have a broader study of political philosophy? I mean, after all, the U.S. is not that old, right? In the scheme of things, the United States is not, it's kind of a Johnny come lately. It hasn't been around that long. So, in English, we don't limit our courses to American literature, right? And philosophy courses aren't limited to American philosophy. So why is the core course on politics at UD specifically focused on American politics? Right? Why not be more comprehensive? And so I want to say a few things about why we have chosen to have the core curriculum introduce you specifically to American politics rather than to some broader pursuit of political philosophy. Now, the primary reason why American politics is part of the core, I mean, obviously the study of politics is ultimately meant to be practical. It's meant to guide action, to help you, kind of make good judgment and act. And so most people who take principles of American politics at UD are going to spend their lives living in the United States under the American government. And so insofar as there's a practical orientation in politics, it makes sense that you have that you would focus on gaining a deep understanding of the political order that you live in, right? To use a somewhat overused word, American politics is more immediately relevant to you than like ancient Athenian politics. So one reason why is because the way American politics is part of the core is because it is practically relevant to you as a citizen. Another reason is just that I would say that especially the founding in the United States, the founders of the American political order really made a rather amazing political achievement and did it quite deliberately, a sort of deliberate, rational construction of a government in accordance with certain principles after much debate. And so I think the American political regime is particularly worthy of study because of the way that it came about through a process of deliberate reflection and construction. It didn't just sort of develop over time in accordance with sort of accidental historical forces and customs. The American political order is in some ways much more deliberately designed than most political orders. But there's also a third reason for studying American politics in the core, and that's that the history of American politics is a history of controversy. It's not a history of everybody dogmatically repeating the same opinions, everybody singing the same tune. In fact, American politics, the history of American politics, has been a site for great controversies over the nature of justice, right? Are all men created equal, right? That question was at stake in, for example, the debate over slavery. And there are all sorts of other debates. To what extent should government be responsible for the welfare of individual citizens? To what extent should the government guide the economy? What does it mean truly to be free? Right? These debates are still with us today. If we're all for equality, fine, but what do we mean by equality? What kind of equality should we be after? Sure, we're all for freedom, but what do we mean by that? What does it mean to be free? There have been very different definitions in the history of American politics. And some of these debates, especially over equality and freedom, still inform the partisan divide that you find in American politics between conservative and liberal, or you could say between Republicans and Democrats. So, we live controversy, fundamental controversies over the nature of justice. So studying American politics is a way of entering into important debates that are directly relevant to our life. And so there are certain kind of really big questions that come up in American politics that make it worthy of study. So by studying American politics, you not only get practically relevant information that you need as a citizen, but also in getting that practically relevant information, you are introduced to debates about fundamental first principles of justice and equality and freedom. So in that way, the study of American politics, I think, is a vitally important part of any education whose aim is to make you somebody who can act for their own good and for the good of others within their broader community when they reach adulthood. It's a vitally important part of what it means to be a fully formed and responsible human being. So that's why the study of American politics is part of the core. So that's what I have to say for why you're taking the course. Now, before we actually get to American politics, as you'll see, the next couple lectures will go back to really kind of before American politics. We're going to have some lectures on Aristotle's political philosophy, where we look at Aristotle as kind of the big representative of the classical approach to political philosophy, which was marked especially by a preference for aristocracy over democracy. So we're going to look at kind of the aristocratic classical political philosophy. And then we're going to have a few lectures on Thomas Hobbes. Now, Thomas Hobbes wrote at a time when America was already being colonized, but he was an English political philosopher. And Hobbes is important because although Hobbes did not have a direct influence on the American founding, he did have an indirect influence because some of the ideas that are important in Hobbes's political philosophy will make their way into the ideas of the American founders, things like the state of nature, social contract, individual rights, consent of the governed. These concepts that become important in American politics are introduced kind of prior to American politics proper. So we're going to look at Aristotle as a representative of the classic case for aristocracy, and then we're going to look at Thomas Hobbes as a kind of predecessor to the very different way of thinking about politics that we have today. So in the next lecture, we'll start talking about Aristotle.